me on that trip back in 2021 when there was so much hope. Senator Young.
Thank you, Chairman. Special Envoy Perriello, there's hope that your appointment to this position will spark the need to end this latest chapter in a decades-long history of violence and humanitarian devastation in Sudan. I share that hope as well, but you're certainly aware that bringing a lasting peace to Sudan isn't achievable in your tenure, however long that will last. In that vein, I'd welcome your big picture perspective on what's achievable in a special envoy role beyond the obvious cessation of hostilities. Specifically, I'd welcome your reflections from your other special envoy role in the Great Lakes region and DRC, dealing with a lengthy, even intractable conflict. What victories and lessons learned do you take from Congo that you can apply in Sudan?
Thank you very much for the question and for the interest. It is true that we have been on a mad sprint the last 3 months. I hope the bags under my eyes can be testimony to how seriously we're taking the urgency of the talks. But we have had conversations and planning sessions about what is the mid-horizon and what is the far horizon. And how do we ensure that across our government, and I think this includes across branches of government, we are prepared to make sure that we are not only ready for failure, i.e. if this gets worse, what do we need to be thinking about by summer in terms of peacekeeping forces or other questions if we're at a fully factionalized war and famine, but also are we prepared for success? Are we prepared that if we can get a breakthrough on peace, that we know how difficult governing is? All of us know it. And that is something I think the Sudanese people want to take on as a project, and they want a very inclusive process there. But until the war is over, it's very difficult to get to some of those questions. To me, this is also part of the solution and the strategy, which is I actually think that the negotiated settlement should be relatively narrow. It should not renegotiate things the Sudanese people have already stated are important to them about an inclusive civilian government, about integrating a reformed professional military underneath that government. Those have been things that have been negotiated before, but we need to be ready for how do we build those democratic institutions, how do we build out the kind of civil society, particularly with youth that make up the vast majority of the country, and would look forward to the conversations about how we ensure being ready for that opportunity.
The role of foreign actors has been discussed already in terms of both those who have destabilized the situation and those who are seeking to bring stability to it. It would be challenging for anyone to defend the actions of those funding this fighting and the genocidal activity on the basis of legitimate economic activities. I'd like for you to clarify for the public unclassified record which countries are working as stabilizer and which are working as destabilizers in Sudan at this moment.
So I realize I didn't answer your Congo part of the question, but let me answer this so it doesn't look like I'm dodging that and can come up to the Congo question or whichever preference of sequence.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
You can synthesize them if you like, but please do get to the question about stabilizers and destabilizers.
Sure. So in terms of lessons from the Democratic Republic of Congo, I'll tell you a negative lesson and a positive lesson. I have said that this conflict is starting to look too much like the DRC in the 90s in the sense that you have many ethnic populations inside Sudan that also overlap with populations in neighboring countries. And it's quite easy as this conflict becomes more ethnic and polarized in nature that it's harder and harder for neighboring countries not to be pulled in either directly into the fighting or facing destabilizing elements in their own country. So I think one lesson is that we need to end this before we get to a point where we are into not a two-sided war, but something that could become a 7, 8, 9-sided war. And related to that, I think it's going to be very important that we have a medium-term future for those who are currently fighting. For some, that will be an integration into the professional military. For others, we know that if we can find the kind of economic opportunities that make people feel invested in a future Sudan, a stronger, more democratic Sudan, that is going to be a much more promising path forward than if people feel like they primarily want to continue to identify with their armed affiliations, as we've seen in the DRC. In this case, I think we've seen many of the countries across Africa, from Kenya up to Egypt, be very constructive in reinforcing the importance of ending the war. Those that share a border with the country, I think, have been able to communicate, not just to each other, but to Gulf actors and others, that this war could consume everybody. So in addition, again, to the kind of humanitarian and human rights arguments we've made about the need to stop this war, I think there's been a very strong realpolitik, pro-stability argument that has come from many of the actors. Yeah. I think we're seeing the African Union and IGAD play a very constructive role in trying to ensure that there is the proper multilateral and African leadership on calling for that. We appreciate that the Saudis have agreed to host talks, and not just host talks, but have a more inclusive set of co-facilitators that we think collectively has enough leverage to compel the two sides to act. We are hoping that we lock in the further details for those talks as we go forward. As I said, we've seen some actions from the United Nations that are positive in terms of the Ramadan ceasefire resolution, even though it was not respected, was at least a step towards showing that the UN is taking this more seriously, as was the expert panel. We certainly have felt like a number of countries in the region have been pouring fuel on the fire at key areas. Certainly there's been documentation in terms of the UAE's role, but also the question about Iran and open source reporting in other areas. And we think that it's very important that people understand this not as an opportunity to try to drive wedges and fissures, but to try to be part of a peace process.
You mentioned the UAE. What's motivating their interest in this situation?
Well, we can take that up, but I think what I'll say is what should be motivating them is that destabilizing Sudan will be something that has very negative repercussions for the region, and even for how their interest in the region, including what we've seen as an increase in some of the Islamist extremist elements that like to take advantage of a fractured or failing state. And we think it's important to understand that there will be growing consequences for the atrocities of the RSF and those who have been connected to them. In terms of their motivations more broadly, we can talk about that or our opinions of that going forward, but I think what's clear is they have committed to the peace talks. Yeah. They have committed to negotiating in good faith, and we believe that we can get to a point where we can be partners in a peaceful resolution in Sudan.
You don't want to offer an assessment of their motivation today?
I would say beyond the fact that we understand that everyone in the region has interests in the stability of the port and the economic development of the country. I think people probably have different versions of how that motivates them. But I think that what's clear is none of those things are well served by a protracted war. And therefore, we need to make sure, and I think this is getting through to a number of key actors, that everybody can benefit from a stable Sudan and nobody gains other than the extremists from it falling apart.
Thank you very much for your work and to members of your team, Mr. Perriello.